incest. So you're going to have to marry outside the group. Now, one thing you can do what chimpanzees do, which is to raid other groups and take away partners. But on the other hand, it's also easier if you cooperate as well. And we know large groups of hunter-gatherers get together for periods like during a salmon run. There'd be a lot of celebration for periods of time, and often at that point, that's when you exchange wedding partners, and they would go to the different groups. Survival means you've got to pay attention to biology at this point. You can't marry inside the group, you find a partner outside the group. All right, so that's hunter-gatherers. Let's move on. This is where human beings have spent most of our history, hunting and gathering. People sometimes talk about the human biological desire to raise plants. That's not much. Our bodies are the bodies of hunter-gatherers. What kind of food is best for us? Nutrition classes. Doctors tell you, what should we be eating mostly?
Fruits and vegetables.
Fruits and vegetables and a little bit of meat. That's what hunter-gatherers eat. Do we like to travel around? The first thing you do when you retire and get enough money, what do? Travel. What do guys like to do? I don't know, play games, baseball, football. But what are those games like? What really is that very similar to? Guys getting together, going out on their own, and throwing a little ball at each other and hitting it with a stick? What is that like? Hunting. Hunting. Guys pay money to go out and hunt little animals. They pay money to watch other guys basically engage in hunting. Throwing javelins, throwing balls, that kind of stuff. These are bodies. Our whole biology is based on hunter-gatherers. But about 10 to 15,000 years ago, again, apologies to the anthropologists in the crowd, big stretches of time, probably human beings are driven to start raising animals and plants. Hunter-gatherers love being hunter-gatherers. They like doing what they do, as long as there's enough food. Two limiting factors: the food, and sometimes hunter-gatherers will overhunt and kill off animals. We know that in North America. There's evidence. There used to be woolly mammoths here at the same time human beings were here. Where did they go? We probably hunted them to extinction. But once the animals are gone, what do? Well, somebody comes up with a bright idea. Oh, that little hard thing in the middle of the mango, if you stick it in the ground, it will grow. Horticulture. This is primitive agriculture. Not enough food, so let's start being more productive. Probably the person who discovered agriculture was what sex and why?
Female.
Female, because they were
Gathered.
The other transition at this point is, instead of raising or just raising fruits, nuts, and berries, we raise animals. That's called pastoralism. Particularly raising little grazing animals like goats. Goats are really effective little animals because they can climb sides of hills, they can eat all kinds of stuff. That goat is a very efficient little animal. The females you can milk, you can eat their flesh, you can use their skin for clothing. Even the horns you can use for musical instruments.
Or could you also use the horns as weapons?
Or weapons, yeah. You can use it all then. So you make that transition, driven either by problems in your food source, or, and this as I mentioned in passing just a few minutes ago, too large a population. The population gets too large. So now you start growing stuff. First and probably most importantly, in most human societies we know of, what's called horticulture. This is primitive agriculture, often referred to as slash and burn. Slash and burn agriculture is the most simple form of agriculture we've seen. All right, by this period of time, like it's, even going back as far as 15,000 years, which means even if we go back the least amount of time in early human history, 100,000 years, 85% of all human history has been spent in hunting and gathering. Okay, so you come into an area, you want to grow stuff, but there's already stuff growing. How do you get rid of it? Well, first off, you cut the big stuff down, the trees, the bushes. That's the slash part of slash and burn. They certainly have stone tools by this point. Then they got a lot of the little stuff. The grass is growing around underneath the bushes. How do you get rid of that? Now, what do? You burn it. That way you don't have to weed it. And it has two other advantages. Anybody guess? Two other advantages of burning off the other material. Yes, Michael?
It adds to the soil.
Very good. It acts as fertilizer. The ash acts as fertilizer. And second, by burning, you're also killing off the little seeds of the weeds that remain so they don't come back. Slash and burn. Now, you got cleared the stuff, you come along with a digging stick. This is a stick with a sharp point. You poke it to the ground, you're throwing a seed, it grows. That's the simplest form of agriculture we know of. But it's a hell of a lot more productive than going out and looking in the wild for fruits, nuts, and berries. Yeah.
Isn't there also a con to that where like you burn the ground and raise it, it basically damages the soil to where nothing can grow for a few years?
Okay. Not yet, but that's coming up. That's a very important limiting factor on these peoples as well. You raise a very significant point for early horticulture. It's not so much that the burning destroys the soil. That's putting ash in the ground. But is that a lot of fertilizer going in there? No. Most of this agriculture is taking place in temperate climates, I mean, where there's a lot of rainfall. You don't have, you're not sophisticated enough to do irrigation. But because there's a lot of rainfall, that's good, you don't have to irrigate. But because also there's a lot of rainfall, what is that doing? It's leaching the minerals out of the soil. If you have this primitive form of agriculture, how long can you farm the same piece of land over and over again? Maybe a year or two before it goes barren. Now, that's the reason for the problem. It's not because you're burning the soil, it's because you're not replenishing it. Actually, what you should be doing, frankly, is burning the crop left over and then putting the stuff back in. But they don't have this kind of knowledge yet. So the soil is going to go bad relatively quickly. And that's going to put a limiting factor on their size of a social surplus. Surplus? Yes, there's a little bit of surplus, but it's not big. Not everybody, not even the majority of people, not even 80% of the people are going to, not even 15% of the people are going to be free. Maybe 3 to 5% of the people are going to have enough food so they don't have to be involved in subsistence. But this is still, what this means is you're going to get a lot larger societies. The smallest horticulturists are a couple hundred people. The most advanced horticulturalists were the Mesoamericans, which you get a civilization of tens of thousands of people, up to 100,000. That's a huge horticultural society. Those are fairly precarious societies because of the problem of the soil going bad. Many people have speculated why it was that a handful of Spaniards on horseback, okay, with guns, we get that, but how many Spaniards came into the New World, people like Cortez? I don't know, maybe 100? And they proceeded to take over civilizations of tens of thousands of people? I mean, the odds were not good for them. How did that happen? How come?
Disease from carrying over?
Yes, we'll talk about that later. There's a famous book, we'll actually have an extra called Guns, Germs, and Steel. They brought in a lot of their diseases and that destroyed them. But what we also know is that these civilizations actually were in conflict with each other in breakdown when the Spaniards arrived. There was a problem with their agriculture going bad, and their societies were being weakened by internal strife and conflict over land. That allowed the Spaniards to come in and divide them and conquer. So, again, might as well come back to the form of subsistence technology. Small social surplus allowing a larger society and a more settled way of life, semi-permanent village life. They'll stay around in the same area for years, for a year or two, 3, even 5 years. But inevitably, they're going to have to move on because they've exhausted the soil. Most Native Americans were horticulturalists, not true hunter-gatherers. We know that horticulturists continue to hunt and gather. But most of their food source is coming from raising plants or animals. When the white boys arrived in the New World, were the Native Americans already farming? Remember Thanksgiving? I know we're giving thanks to God, but we're also giving thanks to the Native Americans because they told us how to grow the pumpkins and the squash and the corn, which were not foods in the European diet before arriving in the New World. Tomatoes. When the white boys arrived in the New World, they thought tomatoes were poisonous. Actually, I don't even know anything about tomatoes, but they're a native related to deadly nightshade, a poisonous plant that they had in Europe, so they never touched them. And even the leaves on tomato plants, you don't want to eat them. Now, they're not going to kill you, but they can make you sick because there's enough of that toxin in those leaves. They arrived, Native Americans are already growing food. If they're growing food, they are not true hunter-gatherers. They're largely horticulturalists who will also engage in hunter-gathering. Okay, so settlement, semi-permanent, teepees, larger groups of these folks. Division of labor increases. For the first time, we get a group of people who do nothing to feed themselves. The first to emerge, at least according to the Lenskis, a group of full-time warrior priests. Warrior priests. Their life is spent in developing arts of warfare. Now, 15,000 years ago, do they have bows and arrows? Oh yeah. It takes a long time to fashion a bow and arrow, to make it good. I mean, you just can't have any kind of stick. I remember as a kid trying to do a bow and arrow, just pull a stick off a tree and try and shoot it. I mean, a curved stick, it goes whomp. Now you got to carefully fashion the shaft of the arrow. You got to shave it down so it's perfectly straight. Then you got to get a hardened tip to that arrow, which you have to attach to it. Then you got to get the little feather so it doesn't wobble in the air as it flies. And you got to forward the bow, and you have to practice year after year after year to get good at that. But if you get good at that, you're really good at it. And now you've had the time to do that. Likewise, you've had a lot of time now to think about your relationship to the spirit world. Notice something here. With the change to horticulture, this is what's referred to, anthropologists, as the Neolithic Revolution. Along with the Industrial Revolution, this is one of the great changes in human history. The Neolithic Revolution, which means you've gone from a state of nature, which nature controlled you, that's hunter-gatherers, to beginning at least to control nature. Control nature by way of horticulture, which is primitive agriculture, or pastoralism, which is the raising of small animals. This has a huge impact. This warrior priest caste spends all its time practicing war, practicing religion, and you get a more sophisticated version of both of those. Let's talk first about inequality. What we find is that inequality now grows. Our stratification system becomes more complex and more unequal. The Lenski say it is a depressing fact about human history. As we grow more technically sophisticated, our societies grow more unequal. Look, you got a bunch of people, most of them, I mean 95%, 98% of people probably out there farming land, sticking the stick in the ground, growing the seeds. You got maybe 1-2% of the population that are the warrior priests that spent their entire life with bows and arrows and thinking about the relation to the spirit world. If I've spent my life with a bow and arrow and you spent your life sticking a little stick in the ground, can I control 50 people in a room like this? If I spent my life as a warrior? Oh yeah. The first thing I'll do is like start killing the big guys.